Good afternoon, everyone, once again, and welcome to today's Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series webinar. Today's topic will be on exploring the Blueforce Employee module. Now, in creating the module, we realized that there was quite a bit of information that is useful to know about the Employee module, so we decided to go ahead and make two different webinars. So this week we'll focus on part one, and then we'll continue on the discussion of the Employee module with part two next week on next week's webinars. But for today, as always, we do mute everybody. So if you have any questions, any concerns that come up during today's call, please go ahead and type those in the question area of the control panel, and I'll address them at the appropriate time in our conversations. Now, as a reminder, the webinars that we do offer here as part of the Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series, are set up so that all of our Blueforce users are being provided the knowledge and critical tools needed to easily and efficiently master the Blueforce system. Now, as a reminder, we do these every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. And actually, we have the schedule open all the way out through May right now. So if you want to register in advance, so you don't forget to do so, you can actually go out into that link that's sent out in the ePay update every Monday. And when you click on that, you can pick any session to register individually for that session, and you'll be good to go. Now, all the webinars obviously are recorded, so we do record this one as well as all the ones we've done since the beginning of the year. They are all posted out on YouTube, and all documentation as well is available to you via Gateway as well as a kind of a share site called Google Drive. And we have, I've included the links here, so when you go out there and download this document, you have the links at your disposal. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to be dividing the employee module topic into two sessions. So for the first session today, as being part one, we're going to go through and focus on a couple key areas. Before we can actually talk about the employee module, I think it's important for everyone on the call, regardless if you use JDE or not, it's important that you understand the JDE to ePay interface. You kind of understand what triggers what in JDE to create that record over in Blueforce. We'll go through the general process, and I'll focus on the key entry fields for those users on the call today that do utilize JDE to set up employee records and to hire enter the applicant and hire the actual employee. We'll go through a quick 6-7 slides at the very beginning of our session today just to cover those pieces. And then we'll also go into the managing the Blueforce Employee Profile, and that's going to be for all the Blueforce users on the call. And we'll talk about the Rates and Compensation tab, which is out there. We'll talk about the Working Jobs tab, and then we'll wrap it up with a discussion on the Default Shift and Task tab. Now, as I will mention a little later in our call, Blueforce is made up of 8 different tabs on the employee record with different varying pieces of information. We're only going to focus 3 of those today, and then the rest of them will be focused on next week's webinars. So our first topic we'll go into is the JDE to ePay interface. Now, as everyone is aware, the records in ePay just don't pop up there. They just automatically appear there. No one goes in there and keys anything into Blueforce. Everything is actually starts and pretty much finishes in JDE. So in JDE, JDE Edwards is our kind of our ERP system, but more so with that, we actually have it set up where you actually would go and create the employee record there by going through an applicant tracking process, and then from there, once they're actually done with the application process and you've made a decision on hiring them, then that record becomes a hired record in JDE. From which point, then that interface spits it over there to the ePay side. So kind of the way it works is the JDE system sends the following data to Blueforce every 30 minutes. So just so you can kind of understand is all the jobs, all the employees, all the work orders, all that stuff that we see over in Blueforce starts and originates over in JDE. And every 30 minutes is being updated and sent over to Blueforce. Now, it is critical that these items are set up correctly from the get-go. So that's kind of our focus today, is kind of show you those key items from the employee record so we make sure those get set up properly. Now, once they're in Blueforce, the employees in most of our devices can actually punch in immediately. So for phone in, for web punch, and for mobile punch, those users have the jobs at their disposal. They actually, as an employee, they can start using those devices or methods of clocking in immediately. Now, keep in mind, phone-in is the only method that doesn't require any additional setup on your part or the part of the IT ePay team. So on phone-in, the employees can just go to the clock, they have an employee ID, they can go ahead and punch in and punch out. For web punch and for mobile punch, there's a little setup because we have to set up a username here on our end. Here was part of the ePay team. But other than that, the time clocks, the employee will also have to be registered or set up on that clock. But with the time clocks, I want to bring to everyone's attention that it does take a little longer for the time clocks because the clocks, although Blueforce has the information, the time clocks are on their own sync schedules. So that sync schedule automatically kind of determines when that data becomes available to the clock. So we may have provided the information to Blueforce, say at 9 a.m., but that clock doesn't sync again until 3 p.m. You're not going to be able to do anything with that employee until 3 p.m. or later on that clock. So the syncs can always be forced at the clock if need be, but its bottom line is these syncs determine when that Walter device actually pulls down a new employee information. Now, kind of on my next slide here, just kind of a quick overview. For those that do have JDE access and actually work with JDE, it is important that these fields here listed are entered correctly. Now, 4 fields there are in red purposely because those fields are all on us. We're the ones that have full control of keying in information to those fields. Of the 8 fields that are noted here with the bullet points, the 4 that are in gray are actually driven off of other fields or may or may not be needed in essentially like the override task. But the ones in red are highlighted because those are the actual, they really don't populate based on any entry into other fields. So you have to go and validate and just kind of make sure that the right information is being keyed into those items, those fields. Nonetheless, in any way, shape, form you look at this, if you fail to enter any valid data into any of these fields, that could result in the employee record from JDE not interfacing or transferring over to ePay. So let's focus on these kind of quick fields just so everyone can understand what the importance is and what these fields do. So in JDE, there is on the employee record, and this once again, this is for those that have employee access to the employee record in JDE. And when we're looking at the kind of the list of our attendees today on the webinar, there's a handful of you that actually have access here. So I guess listen up. Those 8 fields are listed here, and this tab is called the Employees Details window. And in here, you can actually go through and see the home district, the default working job, job type, etc. All that information that was set up on the employee record. The first 2 here, district and default working job, are key into this process. The district is going to be essentially what district does that employee belong to. You know, they belong to company 102, which is Dallas. Their district would be 10201, 10202, 10203, etc. But the district actually just designates that district field just designates what's the employee's home district. Now, the default working job is very important as well because it's the 7-digit job number that the employee will primarily work. Doesn't mean that the employee can't work other jobs. This is their default or their primary job site. Now, keep in mind that this is a job number. No districts should be entered in this field. Now, there are maybe one or two exceptions here and there for that default working job. Typically, no one has a district level unless you're like an admin employee. Maybe some of us on this phone call today. You're probably the only exception to the rule, but everyone should have a default job of a 7-digit number. Now, these come in play a little bit later here shortly when we talk about the assignment type field. So hold those thoughts what I just mentioned about the default job. Now, item C is our job type and step, and that field is basically coming from a job title or job position that's already been assigned on another screen in JDE. So at this point, we just validate that information is correct. In this case, my example in step C shows a 50126, and I cut off the little field to the right there, but the field there is actually the field that lists the actual position. In this case, 50126 is our code for a janitor or custodian. So just so you know, that's just kind of a position or that the employee has been hired for. Supervisor, just validate the supervisor field's filled in. That just lets you know this is the supervisor for that particular job. E, default task. Default task is the primary task for this employee. Now keep in mind that by default, his or her hours in ePay are coded to this task, unless you override it in ePay. So keep that in mind. So how this works, the default task is essentially if the step C job type says they are a janitor or custodian, then the task, it should come in as, my example on step B, 500, a custodian. It should be a one-to-one relationship. However, there are some positions that may not have a exact task that match it. For example, we really don't have a CEO a CEO job type in the system. There is not really related to a CEO task on the ePay side or on the task models that we have set up in there. So in those cases, the system will try to do a best equivalent to that particular job type and step or position. So sometimes you may not get the correct task showing there. So in that case of a CEO job type with a default task of custodian, perhaps, that might be an opportunity for you to go in there and use, which is now step F or field F, they're called override task. We can then tell the system, you know what, I appreciate you saying that we need to code this person as custodian, but they really should be a window cleaner. So you can actually put their default task there. Now in turn, the system will send the default task over to ePay, and the default task is validated against the job records that the employee has access to. If that task is available on that job record, then the ePay system will provide that as their default task on that job record. But once again, if that task is not part of a valid task on that job record, then ePay will assign a equivalent task for that employee on the ePay side. So just bottom line, this is just a field that we need to kind of get right, because the task will determine some information when it gets back to JDE during the payroll process. And just so you know, as I mentioned here on step F is the override task. You have the option to clean up your task and override the task that's been given to you by ePay. Step G is the assignment type. Now we'll come back to task in a little bit when we talk about the default shift and task on the actual Blueforce record. We'll come back to that discussion, but that's enough just to kind of get past this particular slide. Step G there, assignment type, that's going to drive what and the number of jobs that the actual employee is given as part of the employee working job tab on the employee profile in Blueforce. Now, this tab, I guess what you can when we go into Blueforce, that working jobs tab, which we'll address here momentarily, looks to this field, and bottom line what it says, if this assignment type, for my example here in step G, it says job. What that means is that this particular employee is only going to be assigned to a job, and that is it, one job. So if you have a job assignment type, the system then says, all right, if you have a job assignment type down here below, the system will say then only go up here to the default working job and assign the employee the default working job for that, to assign that employee just to that one job as part of your working jobs record. Now, over in Blueforce, which I'll explain a little later, is you can always add and take away jobs to an employee's working jobs. And once again, the working jobs is just the jobs that the employee can punch in and out of. But JDE is trying to assist us here because it's saying we only need one job assigned to them by putting them as a job assignment type. Now, if for some reason you don't put a job assignment type and you make that the other option of district, the system then says, all right, well, since you want a district assignment type, then here it'll say district, or DIS for short, and the system will actually pull out the employee's home district and assign that employee to all the jobs under that district. So sometimes the question becomes is, you know what, I look over in Blueforce and I see this employee assigned to 25 different jobs. Why? This is exactly the reason why. If they are a district assignment type, they're going to get all the jobs available to them within that district. The last option for assignment type is area, and area just goes one step broader, and that just says that give me access to all of the jobs in my home company, which is right above the district field here. So If I say area, that gives me every job available for that is given to that employee for company 102 in my example up above here. So I'll go with that in a little more detail when we actually see the employee working jobs tab here in a couple slides. And lastly, pay groups. Pay group is important because the pay groups drive the rules for the employees. For those that joined us last week, I talked about the pay group just a little bit, but the pay group governs those OT rules. It governs the union versus non-union, any holiday rules, any other pay rules that are involved. So it's important that we get the pay group right from day one. If an employee gets sent over the wrong pay group, they are subject to getting the wrong OT rules, subject to get the wrong pay differential rules or no pay differential rules at all, etc. There's tons of things that could go wrong as far as paying the employee correctly. So if at any point we get this, we notice that there's an incorrect pay group, let's go in there and fix it, and the system will actually update it. Now, the one thing about the pay groups is, unfortunately, as I mentioned last week, is the pay groups only update every Saturday morning, the beginning of the pay week, the new pay week. So if you figure this out, say, for example, on a Thursday, you can submit a help desk ticket, and someone here on the ePay team can go through and help you change that pay group or force a pay group change over on the Blueforce side. But this record has to be updated initially first, since JDE is the system of record for everything we do. The last slide I want to just mention real fast as far as we talk about the JDE to ePay interface is for those that have JDE access, it is actually suggested and strongly suggested that you run this employee exception report. Now, there's an ePay employee exception report in JDE that allows you to go through and identify which employees' records have fields missing. And these fields missing obviously are required, so you may see some anomalies. I mean, first of all, more than likely you will not see the employee record in Blueforce. So when that happens, you're trying to figure out, okay, why do we not have an employee record in Blueforce when I have employees in JDE? What's going on? Well, it's because there's some missing fields. So if you go ahead and run this report, you can actually see if the necessary fields, the default task, the default working job, the assignment type, and pay group are entered. And secondly, kind of a big glance, you can kind of see if they're all correct. So employee exception report is there for your use, and you should actually be running that at least once a week, if not more often. So that kind of concludes our first section of the webinar, which is dealing with the JDE to ePay interface. So let's move over into Blueforce. Now that we have the JDE stuff filled out, record filled out, and the interface has picked up that record and delivered it within the 30-minute window over into Blueforce, now you can actually manage that employee's profile. So as I mentioned earlier, the employees can start immediately using the time collection devices and start punching in and start accumulating and allocating their time in Blueforce. And to that note, just keep in mind that our employees are ISS's greatest assets, so you want to retain them and make them feel that they are part of an integral part of the company's mission. Make ePay work for them from day one. Too many times employees start, and for whatever reason, we don't register them on the clocks for several days, weeks. Fools are punching in. Keep in mind, let's get that working for them from day one. Manage the editors submit day. You have access to maintaining, or at least going in there and viewing the employee icon here. Allows you to go through and see all the employees that may work a particular job or are part of your area of responsibility. Now, when you do click on employees, you will get prompted to do a job selection. You actually pick a job, only to one job. You'll be given the employee list view. The employee list view here has a lot of key pieces of information that's going to be beneficial to you. First off, the list right that pops up will show you a listing of all the employees to that your particular employee, active employees. So in saying that 36 employees are currently available for you have selected. So it shows you that you have work under that. Or maybe they don't all work there, but they're at least assigned as part of their working jobs to that particular job. All you've done is made it available for that employee to punch in at that particular job. In this case, the Diocese of Sioux City. That's been selected. What I always say here is, okay, I have all these employees. I only have 5 that actually work this job. The other those employees. Well, as I mentioned, is that working job on the employee profile, which I'll show you here in a couple of slides and talk about it in more detail. But that's where you would control that. But bottom line, 36 employees match your criteria down here that's been on the selected job. Now, keep in mind that the number of employees assigned to this job is really controlled initially by that assignment type that I talked about a while ago over in JDE. So the main concern that comes up is sometimes our employees have too many jobs, access to too many jobs, and that is obviously controlled at the from that you can actually go into access as well. But ultimately, we should always clean up JDE because JDE is our system of record, and we want to make sure it's always correct there initially. Over on the far right-hand side, you have the submitters and approvers. You'll be able to see this particular column. Otherwise, this column is kind of hidden from you. That standard rate column will show the pay rates for all of our hourly employees. Salaried employees that show up in the system do not carry over a standard rate. And most times, we just pass a blank or a 0 rate for all those. That is essentially the pay groups. So if you notice, as I come down to this pay group field, and just kind of goes down the line here, you'll see all the pay groups look identical, they look identical, and boom, there's a different pay group in there. So the question becomes is that employee assigned to the proper pay group? Because particularly, once again, I have one job selected. So if all these employees are truly working just this job, they should probably all have all the same pay group, unless you have a mix of union and non-union employees, which is very rare, but we do have that in a couple situations around the country. Typically, our jobs are all non-union or all union, with a few mixed situations out there. So right here on this employee list, you have access to seeing all the employees' default pay groups. So you can quickly determine if that employee has the right pay group information. Once again, if they do not have the right information, then please enter a help desk ticket so we can help you correct that pay group immediately. So bottom line with that pay group discussion is just make sure that you pay attention and you're familiar with where your employees should be assigned to. Now, the one other thing that this screen will provide to you is that you can actually see off to the far right-hand side, the very last column is entitled Fingerprints. And on this, you can actually see if this employee has been assigned, or sorry, more so registered on a Walter time clock. What that basically means is for those time clock devices out there that we have called Walters, those time clocks, you can actually have those employees register their fingerprint to use their biometric functionality. And if they're going to the clock every day, punching in, punching out, and they have a no here, then you're always going to increase your invalid punch punches, and that's going to bring down that invalid punch score that we have for your metrics. So keep in mind, look in here, look at your employees and see who's registered or not. The way this works is as soon as an employee is registered on a time clock, the system on the next sync will send that information back to Blueforce and tell the employee profile to update this field to a yes. And if you see any yeses here, this is probably a bad example, but my screen here, all of them say no, and rightfully job is end job. But if it was a time clock, we'd expect all these fingerprints. Step is going to simply click on the employee link. That link under the actual employee number or payroll number, both of them being the same reference here, or either field under the last name or first name field will get you into the employee profile. Now once you're in there, you'll be exposing all the different fields that are our editing or edit. Now, the first thing that comes to mind when you go in through here, you will see yellow and blue sections. Orange and blue sections. Now, the orange sections that you see there are going to be fields or areas that you have no access to making any edits. So that being said, you can't change the employee name, can't change the employee ID, you can't change your default site. All fields available here, you're able to edit are in this little yellow. So any that is not correct, it's straight up bottom line. Names, obviously, name changes. Hopefully the hire date is correct, but if it's incorrect, we gotta get that right. Default job, obviously, stuff like that, you have to get that corrected in JDE first. There's no way around that. At the bottom of the screen, you will see all the different tabs I was talking about, 8 tabs in all, and each of those tabs does different functionalities. For today's webinar and for the remainder of our call today, for the next 30 minutes, I'm just going to focus on these first three tabs. The rest of the tabs and some other discuss one piece of information before we get to the tabs. There is a blue area up here, kind of hidden, but it's called the miscellaneous. I call it the miscellaneous tab, but it's not really a tab. It's kind of just an area on the employee profile. But this miscellaneous section is where you can actually go through and set one cool feature for your employees. Now, this particular tab has a function or a field selection there called preferred language, where you can actually set the preferred language for that particular employee. Now, if they are using the Walter time clocks as part of the registration process, they are already prompted for that as for English, Spanish, Polish, or French. They are given those options on the time clock, and then when they select that, it automatically updates their employer profile. But for those using the other methods, for example, phone in, you can go in here and select a preferred language, as well as web punch and mobile punch. Let me just stress to you that for phone in, it's nice to update the preferred language here. However, phone in has a dedicated Spanish line and a dedicated English line at this point. There's no other languages currently set up for phone in. However, those will probably coming down the pipe here in the near future. Over on the web punch side, as well as the mobile punch, right now when you log in, there is no selection criteria to change the language or to pull from the preferred language selection here. There are updates that will be coming actually dictate what the employee is actually seeing is with this tab for the All right, so let's talk about rates and compensation. Rates and compensation is essentially a tab that will provide you all the rate information if you have access to seeing it as you submit. You'll be able to go in there and cool things. The compensation piece of this tab is a workman's compensation piece. We actually do not use it currently in Blueforce, so I won't spend time talking about that on this call, but just know we don't currently use it in anything to that won't affect anything. So if you go to this tab, anyone can go in there and view it because it isn't in blue, but if you don't have access to the rates, you're going to see two different things. Top of the screen, that view, you'll see it if you do not have access to pay rates. The bottom of the screen, notice that it opens up a little bit for you if you have access to the rates. Now, the way this works is you have a pay rate field. The pay rate field is shown for you at the bottom of the screen. My example here shows $10 as being the standard pay rate. Now, every employee simply has one, I'm going to call it a default pay rate in JDE, Therefore, the interface only sends one rate to Blueforce. Now, we do understand that occasionally an employee may work multiple jobs, and those different jobs or tasks, more precisely the tasks they actually work, can result in a different pay rate. So, for example, this employee may work job A at $10 an hour. However, you may have a job B where you have that employee working $12.50 an hour. Perfectly fine. We can set up a task on that job for that employee. So when they use that task and job combination, when someone punches in there for that same job and task combination, they're going to get paid at the higher $12.50 rate. Now, with that, there is a field called override task that I just want to bring to your attention. Everyone on this phone call has access to edit this checkbox as needed. However, I would urge you not to touch it unless you really know what you're doing. But bottom line, this tab, what it does, I want to point out two things before I talk about the override rate. Is the pay rate field comes from JDE. We want it to be in sync with JDE. So in other words, don't touch that rate. That rate can cause some havoc. If you go in there and mess with it and accidentally put an extra zero, go in there and change it to something else. When the system comes back, there's some validations that go on in a part of our interface during our payroll process. And if things are out of sync, that could cause a delay to payroll. So we do not want to be messing with this pay rate. It's a standard rate. But going back to what I was mentioning is you have an employee working two different jobs and within those jobs, the two different tasks pay different rates. We can actually go in there and set up a rule on that particular task on the other job that says when they use that job and task combination, pay them at that different rate. In that case, they get paid correctly, but keep in mind that you have an option for override task rate. What that says is if I leave it no or unchecked, the pay rate on the task is always going to drive the rate that an employee works. So $10 is here. If the task of, in my example, window cleaners, has a $15 rate associated to it, when that employee selects that task, or if someone edits a time card later and changes the task to window cleaner, the employee is going to get paid $15 for their time. No harm, no foul. The system automatically picks up that change and pays accordingly. Now, if you go ahead and check that override task rate field down below, and actually it changes it now to yes, what's going to happen is the system says override the task rate all the time. That means that whatever that employee's pay rate is, regardless of where they work, regardless if they go into a hazardous situation, regardless if they go up a scaffolding to work a kind of a high cleaning level, they're always going to get paid their standard rate of $10. So all employees right now, unless we've had this discussion between the ePay team and one of your sites, every employee is unchecked at this current time, meaning that whatever rate is assigned to the task they work in the system, they actually will get paid that particular rate. So keep in mind, with that task rate situation, if you have any specific task or situations where employees are working different rates, please do not go in the system and edit their rate via the time card or time sheet. That is something that counts against you for for rate changes as part of your compliance metrics. So part of that is we want to know those situations, reach out to the ePay team, and we'll get that programmed in the system. That way, that's one less thing you have to worry about. And secondly, those rate change scores can stay at a 4.0, which they should be. Now, the last two things I want to mention are the billable sections there. You'll have a billable line, a bill rate line. That stuff we're going to be focused on later in the year. That is stuff that we have at our capacity to actually roll out, but we think we're at a point now that we want to actually send that bill rate information back as part of payroll, so that way you can it makes for those on this call that do billing or are involved with the billing process, makes it a little easier from the side to be able to get that done. The next tab is our Working Jobs tab. And the Working Jobs tab is a tab I mentioned quite a bit towards the beginning of our call today, and that is where you can actually go in there and assign what job the employee can work. Now keep in mind, there are two different angles or thoughts around this Working Jobs tab. Some of you will say it's better to have only the jobs that the employee is going to actually work at. That way they don't see all the different jobs that are out there. That's a fair assessment, and I kind of agree with you. But there's another side of the other half of the group here that's going to say that no, it's better to give the employee all the different jobs that they can actually possibly work. That way they can punch in and punch out. So bottom line, the Working Jobs tab is just a way to make it convenient for the employee to punch in and punch out. If they're always going to work one job, then let's leave it at just one job. If they are a route employee or an employee that's going to maybe float around or fill in for spots at different jobs, then for those employees, it makes sense to have them have access to clocking in at different jobs. So the Working Jobs tab is available to everyone on this phone call, so all editors, submitters, and approvers. And it controls, once again, what assigned jobs that employee can punch into. So looking here on the screen, you have a tab called Working Job at the bottom of the window. And that Working Jobs tab, anything on the right-hand side of the screen is available for that employee to punch in and out of. Okay? So let's say, for example, if this employee was set up as a assignment type over in JDE, had an assignment type of just job, what's going to happen here is the system is only going to send that employee's default job. If this employee's default job had been 100 main office, and they were a job type employee in JDE, all these jobs that show up down here below at assigned jobs would not have been there initially. The system would have only sent that one job for them. Now, if they were a district assignment type, once again, the system's only going to send the jobs related to that employee's district. So maybe these were the district jobs that were sent over, and these would not be available for that employee. Maybe we want them. Maybe they're all over the place. Maybe they fill in every night a different job, and you want to make them an area employee in JDE. Well, at that point, then you can come in here and see that these are all jobs are part of the area, or all the jobs that are available for that employee to punch in and punch out. But bottom line, once the jobs are in here, you'll probably find out after today's webinar, if you go out there and look at some of your employees, you're going to realize that a lot of the employees have an abundance of jobs. And a lot of you that are on the call from the IFS side, I will tell you that some of those jobs on the IFS side, there's a lot of them set up for these employees. So it might be to your benefit to go in here and clean it up just to give them access to the ones they really need to see. Bottom line, if they are a phone-in user, when they go in to punch in, the phone-in should be tied to one particular job number, job phone number. So when they punch in, there should be no issues on phone-in. It should just give them one option to clock into. So if they use a mobile punch, however, the mobile punch is going to show them all the jobs they have access to seeing. So mobile punch users, you're going to be seeing all, in this case, this is your employee, they'll be able to see all 6 jobs. They may only work at the second job and not the other ones, but they'll be seeing all of them on their mobile device. Same with Web Punch. When you log in to Web Punch, you'll see everything. Time clocks are going to be linked to a specific job or job. So to that, it might be a little bit limited, but still, they might be able to have access to seeing all the different jobs that are available to them. So Working Jobs does a lot. It makes for the flexibility for that employee to work different jobs as needed. Now, more so, the jobs listed here on the right-hand side, like I said, are the assigned jobs. Like I said, to stress, those are the ones that can currently punch into. Now, if you ever need to add to that list, that's what the left-hand side of the screen is there. That's the unassigned jobs. What you can do in there is go in there and search based on a variety of different categories. The 2 in red down at the bottom are the popular ones and probably the ones that are the easiest because you know that information. But the employees can search by job number, job name, address, export category, which is actually the district, city, state, or zip. Keep in mind, if I go in there and type in Houston, Texas, or just Houston for city, keep in mind I'm going to pull up all the jobs in Houston, so that might not always be a good thing. So it's probably good just to search on a specific job name or job number. Now, more so, if I continue here, once I find the job I want, I click on it to highlight it. And once I highlight it, I'll just go to the middle of the screen, click on Assign, and that'll move it over to the Assigned Jobs now. Now, keep in mind, if I'm on there and I'm looking for unassigned jobs, if I can't find the job, if I keep typing in on the left-hand side, 5000737, in this case, I found it. But what happens if I didn't find it? Well, it's either A, I have the wrong job number, or B, the employer already has that job assigned to them, as part of their current working job. So once again, unassigned is the key word here on the left-hand side. Furthermore, you can always remove jobs. So on the right-hand side under assigned jobs, and keep in mind that both sides are always labeled. Left and right, obviously, it's easy to say, but they're always labeled here. Assigned on the right. The previous screen had this said unassigned, so on the left. But nonetheless, if I want to unassign, I'm going to click on the one that I want to unassign or remove from the employee's record. Click on it. Click on that particular job, and then click on remove, and the system will move it to the unassigned job site now. The only thing you have to remember is going through this whole process that you click save at the bottom of the tab or at the bottom of the actual employee profile screen. If you don't hit save, your changes are for naught. The system is not going to record those changes. Now, one anomaly that does occur from time to time is the default job. If the default job is something you want to remove from the employee's working job at the bottom of the screen, keep in mind you will not be able to remove the default site or default job for that employee. If it is incorrect, as I mentioned earlier, you are going to need to go into JDE or have someone with that JDE access, whomever sets up your employee records. And I can't name everyone on this phone call because there's quite a few people that do that around the country. Reach out to them, have them correct the default job information on the employee details screen over in JDE, and then within the next 30 minutes, the system will update. JDE will update that information over in Blueforce via the interface. So then you can come in here at that point and retry removing the employee's default job from the, or now no longer default job from the Working Jobs tab. So bottom line, remember that JDE is a system of record. If you find anything incorrect over in Blueforce as a result of the default task, which I'll talk about next, default working job, the assignment type, pay group, etc., go in there and fix it in JDE, because JDE is where it should start, and ultimately your payroll life from being hired to terminated to collecting time, finally over to getting paid, all starts in JDE and finishes in JDE. The last tab I want to talk about today is the Employee Default Shift and Task tab. The Employee Default Shift and Task tab actually allows you to actually see what is the shift that an employee would work for that particular job. It also allows you to see what their default task or their primary task is at that job site. Saying those two pieces, so far, only thing we've talked about is the task coming in from JDE. So the question always becomes is, where do I get a shift set up in JDE? Well, you don't. The system over in Blueforce, it is actually a Blueforce only setting. In Blueforce, it is required that every job has at least a shift assigned to it. Now, the shift may be a generic shift, which means nothing, and that's perfectly fine. We can create a shift from 7 to 4 and have your employees assigned to it, but in reality, they may work a different shift. Once again, the default shift is really more than just a label, and as I go through here, you'll see exactly what I mean. Now, what are tasks? First off, tasks are the positions or job duties that employer is going to be working at that job site. It drives the geocoding, basically determines if it's a supervision task or a non-supervision task when it comes down to payroll. So kind of how payroll works is, obviously everyone gets paid, but more so, every employee labor entry, every time record is actually coded to a specific task, which in turn goes to a specific account over on our JDE accounting books. So in accounting there, we can actually go through there and run reports and determine, how much labor went to supervision versus non-supervision. So it's very important that the task is correct. Now, tasks are determined in JDE based on the task model that's set up on that particular job record. So real quick, for those that have JDE access on setting up a job, which is typically the admin person at most jobs, or if you have like a hub group that kind of controls a lot of that accounting functionality, they will be setting up the jobs for you as well. But bottom line, in JDE there is a piece called Work with Job Master Staging, which allows the JDE user to go in there and set up this job, and it's there's a field at the very bottom there with a red arrow pointing to it called task model. That task model says if it's a cleaning job, we need to send over the cleaning task. Makes sense, right? Engineering job, engineering task. If it's a landscaping job, then landscaping task. Whatever that correlation is, this should be correct in the task model. Now, if the wrong task model is set up on the job, then guess what? You're going to have the wrong tasks being able to select from when you actually punch in and punch out, or the employees are punching in and punching out. So it's important that this goes back. If we see the incorrect task over in JDE, if we have the incorrect task over in Blueforce, that we raise some concern here and raise that up to whomever set up these jobs in JDE, because we need to get that correct. Now, furthermore, each job has a list of tasks the employee can work. As I mentioned earlier, each employee has a default task, so that is determined in JDE based on the employee's job type step, which is their position or title per se. It's kind of what they're given in JDE. And you can obviously use that override task functionality to override an employee detail screen, show the correct task. Now, this is probably a bad example on my screenshot here, but the default task is 500. There's no need to put an override different tasks. For example, maybe it came across as custodian, but they are really a security guard at their job site. Then you want to change that to 520, whatever that number is for security guard. Now, why do I need to select from a long list of tasks? Now, this is a question, and some of you just kind of look at some of the names on the call today. Some of you have asked me this question, or asked someone on the ePay team, why do we have so many tasks out there? It is true for we use phone-in, mobile punch, and web punch. As on those three time collection systems, or time collection methods, you are prompted to enter a task. So the last prompt on the phone-in, you are given an option to please select one for your default task, or basically select from a list of tasks. Now, the way this works is if your job has 20 tasks to pick from, guess what? If you're on the phone, you're going to listen to 20 different tasks. You're going to hear custodian, you're going to hear window cleaner, you're going to hear recycle tech. You're going to use all these different tasks that may or may have any relevance to the actual job that the work is performing, or you may never ever use them. To that, if you ever have too many tasks out there, I'm going to address that because we want to make sure we clean those up. But bottom line, tasks are really not needed for the Walter time clocks. Now, we can turn that functionality on. We have a handful of clocks that we have it turned on for, but the Walter time clock was set up, they use a functionality called auto task, which means that the system automatically clocks the employee in based on their default tasks. So the question I always get out of this discussion of tasks as well is, over on the time card screen, where does the system get that task from? The employee never picks a task, or what's going on there. That is why the system automatically pulls in their default task from their employee default shift and task tab, which I'm going to show here next. So it's important that we get that correct. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if there are too many tasks that are being read off on the phone-in system, or when you go to Mobile Punch, there's a whole list of tasks to pick from, it's best to limit those just to the ones that the employee needs. It saves them time, saves them a lot of grief and agony when trying to punch in and punch out. But more so, it just cleans up things. So if there are too many tasks, review them, and you can actually get a member of the ePay team, would be myself, Tiandra, Beth, or Jade. One of us can get on the phone call and kind of work with you on those tasks, or more importantly, if you put a help desk ticket, we can go in there and clean those up for you. But the main thing to keep in mind is the example here. A lot of tasks out there on the cleaning model. As part of the cleaning model, you will see elevator starter. And that is actually one that was created for some union jobs in the New York area, I believe, originally. But it kind of snuck across all jobs straight across the board. So when you go to your task there, you may see elevator starter. So really, the question becomes is, who needs an elevator starter? And who needs a recycling tech? If you're not using the task, let us know so we can actually get those cleaned up and out of the way. All right, so what's the purpose of this employee default shift and task tab that I've been talking about? So this tab is going to provide Blueforce the information as to what employee's shift and primary task is on the job. But more so, those default shift and task values will default via the interface from JDE, and the info is driven from the employee detail screen in JD Edwards as well. So once again, you control those shifts over in JDE. As I mentioned, if the JDE job title is incorrect or the desired task is not applicable to the job, Blueforce is going to do its best job to give you a good corresponding task to use. So for example, custodian is trying to be used as on an engineering job. If you try to do that, there probably is no engineering tasks on that job, so that employee will probably be assigned to an engineer or a task called engineering other. So you got options like that to work with. And also, the purpose of this tab is more than just assigning tasks and whatnot. It actually drives the lunch rules. Each shift that's out there, each default shift is where we actually set up those lunch rules. So if an employee is assigned to the wrong default shift, it could affect their lunch rules because that's where it's actually pulling up from. Now, for those on the phone call, a handful of you up there I see are actually using the scheduling module. And the scheduling module that we have out there, and I'll be doing some webinars on that here in the near future, the scheduling module actually will drive and supersede any settings we have on this default shift and task tab. So if you have an employee working in an 8 to 5 shift today, and they normally work the 5 to midnight shift, and then 5 to midnight shift normally doesn't have lunch, but today they're working the 8 to 5 shift and it does take out an hour lunch for them, then the system automatically knows to adjust that because we're using the scheduling module, and the schedule dictates what the employee gets. Since we're not using the scheduling module in about 75% of our jobs, those jobs are going to be falling straight to the default shift alone that's on the employee profile, which I'll talk about here next. It also assists with pay differentials because we can designate or more so segregate those employees that get pay differential and don't. That's kind of how we can do it based on that shift as well. But bottom line, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this section, I said treat the shift as nothing more than a label used to group your employees. All right. So on this next tab, we've got this employee default shift and task tab. Sorry, you're going to be able to go in there and edit any of those tasks you see there. So off to the far left-hand side of that particular job, you'll be able to click on edit and edit that particular entry, default shift and default task. Those two lines in this case are the two jobs my employee can work. Obviously, if you have an employee that has 20 working jobs, then when you go over to that default shift and task tab, you're going to have 20 lines of 20 default shifts for each job, one for each job, and 20 different tasks. Hopefully, they're not all different, but 20 tasks for one for each job as well. But if you come in here and notice that my main office is the primary job or the first job on the list here, and the default shift is wrong, or the employee really doesn't work as a custodian at this job, they're really a window cleaner, then just go over here, click on edit, and the system will open up and allow you to make those changes. Once again, we want to get this correct for that employee. So then now we have the opportunity now to go in there and pick the correct shift. Now there is no limit to how many shifts can be added on a job, but we don't want to go too crazy with that either. But pick the right shift and assign accordingly. If you're missing a shift there, you can always put in a help desk ticket or reach out to one of the ePay team members, and we can actually go in there and make those additional shifts for you. Typically, the shifts are set up down over on the scheduling module. And well, like I said, I'll have a webinar that in a couple of weeks on just that, so you can understand more about that scheduling module and potential uses for that. Now, also, you can also, like I mentioned, key point here is you want to edit the task as needed. So, for example, when my employee here works corporate campus, which is my second job on the list, they're not a window cleaner. They actually serve as a supervisor there. So you can actually have mixed tasks where an employee serves as maybe a day porter during the day, but at night they work somewhere else as a supervisor. So you can actually go in there and assign it accordingly just like that. So that's nothing you have to do in JD Edwards. This is all done right here in Blueforce. You can control the default task for that particular job, for that particular employee. So once again, once you're done with making those changes and edits, once again, I urge you to do this yourself. There's no reason to call the ePay team for assistance. If you do, we'll be glad to help you. But you can control the default shift and task on your own. But once you make those changes, you click on Update on the far left-hand side, and at the very bottom of the screen you click on Save. Now when you do click on Save, your nice little name and time you made this edit is going to be tagged at the bottom of the record to let you know that the last change was done by Joe Schmo at 2 p.m. Central Time. So you have that opportunity to see that. So that kind of wraps up the actual default shift and task tab. It's a powerful tab. It's something that we need to get correct as our employees are getting paid based on that task. They are not necessarily not getting paid, but that information is getting recorded into our accounting books based on that task they are working. So kind of to wrap up, I just want to say once again, we do have support available at any point. So if you want to reach out to us, please do so via a help desk ticket or help desk phone call, and we'll put in a help desk ticket for you. This just helps us manage all the different requests we get, and obviously kind of helps out that we don't overlook someone's request in an email that's kind of mixed in with all the other emails we get. And believe me, we get plenty of emails. And secondly, also just not voicemail that's just sitting there waiting for someone that may or may not be in the office on that particular day. As I mentioned earlier, we'll start part 2. We'll continue the different tabs on the employee profile as well as some other cool things about the employee profile next week. And we'll do that next Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. So until then, enjoy the rest of your work week, and we'll catch you again on next week's Mastering the Blueforce Webinars.